Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Welcome to the Reparations Study Group. I am Jackson Hollingsworth, a very proud member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, here with our national chair, Jesse Nevel. Uhuru.
Uhuru Jackson.
Uhuru. Very honored to be on this study tonight. And just wanted to welcome everyone who's tuning in. Please share this far and wide and participate in the discussion tonight. You can put your questions and comments into the comments, but also you can call in at 727-537-9171. And this is the place where you can really, ask all of your questions about the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the Uhuru movement at large. If you're just tuning in and for the first time ever, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, we are under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So they form and lead us. We are the Solidarity Front of the African Liberation Movement. We organize in the white community for reparations, which is a revolutionary demand, returning all of the stolen resources that this parasitic white power capitalist system extracts from African people, including the Black community here in the US, and colonized people around the world. And so, that's our job. We organize in the white community for reparations, and in fact, that's one of our 3 principles of unity. First, we're under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. 2 is that we recognize that African people have the right to lead their own struggle. So the African People's Socialist Party leads us. They deploy us into our white community, where we, as I mentioned before, number 3 principle of unity is that we organize in the white community for reparations. So, as I said, our national chair, Jesse Nevel, is here with us, our guest tonight. And I want to begin by, saluting you, Chair Jesse, for being here, but also want to salute the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who you can see on his new book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution. This photo was taken at the 7th Party Congress in front of the African flag at the Black Power Blueprint Economic Programs in St. Louis, Missouri. And this book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, is his report to the 7th Congress. That was about a year and a half ago. And since we have had the first plenary or planning conference of the 7th Congress, really laying out the strategy for this period in the African Revolution. So salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I want to salute Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela. I have her report to the last plenary here. That's her right here. She leads all of the economic work of the Uhuru movement, including the 50-plus institutions that are just like this full page here that include programs of the Solidarity movement and the various departments that fundraise as well, which includes the Office of USN. So salute Deputy Chair, and salute the entire National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party. And you can see all of their photos on page 8 of your Burning Spear newspaper if you have yours. And I want to give another salute to Akile Anayi, pictured right here. She's the director of agitation and propaganda for the Uhuru movement, African People's Socialist Party, which includes being the editor-in-chief of the Burning Spear newspaper, which we are studying tonight. And then lastly but not leastly, I want to salute Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee. The African People's Solidarity Committee is the direct leadership of USM under the party. They're the cadre organization of white people under its leadership, and here is Chairwoman Penny. We studied her column last week on page 11, so if you missed that episode, skip back and be sure to hear that. So I wanted to welcome everyone who's tuning in, and Chair Jesse, do you have any words you would like to say before we begin our study tonight?
Sure. I want to echo all of your revolutionary salutes of our incredible leadership in the African People's Socialist Party, of course, starting with our chairman, Omali Yeshitela, and the deputy chair, Onezene Yeshitela, and the whole party, and Chairwoman Penny Hess, and all of the leaders and members of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and you as well, Jackson.
Thank you, Chair Jesse.
What episode is this?
This is episode 10.
Episode 10. Let's give that a round of applause.
Yes.
There we go.
Very historic.
Yes. So I just want to appreciate this study. I think it's extremely important that we hold this study every single week of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, that we have a place for members, supporters, and contacts, and hopefully brand new people who become members of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, white people, to engage with the theory of African internationalism and to really struggle to internalize it and to understand it, not so that we can feel really smart next time we're in a debate with somebody, although that is a nice perk.
Yes.
Because you will win every debate once you grasp the theory of African internationalism. You can't lose. But more than that, you will be able to be better armed to go out into the world and carry out the work of reparations to African people. And as the chairman always says, African internationalism is a theory of practice. And that's something really amazing to think about, that like you can't call yourself an African internationalist if you're not applying the theory of African internationalist, because that is actually built into the theory itself. The theory of African internationalism itself says that in order to be an African internationalist, you have to be implementing the principles and theory and goals through the organizational vehicle of the African People's Socialist Party or one of its constituent organizations. That is actually a tenet of African internationalism. So it's built into the theory itself, that it's a theory that demands practice. It's a theory that is tested in practice and proven in practice. And for white people, what that looks like is going into our own white communities as organizers for the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and winning other white people to also internalize this worldview, the worldview of the African working class. And it's a very thrilling and exhilarating thing to do, because you know, I think some people, rightfully so, might be skeptical of political theory and philosophy and things like that, because most of the time when you hear white people talking about philosophy or theory, you're looking at like stale academia, or people who are just trying to prove how many philosophical jargon terms they know, or you know, professors or charlatans like what's his name, Slavoj Žižek or something like that. Yeah, somebody like, you know, who's just trying to sell books, and that's not what this is. You know, this is a blade that cuts through all of that and exposes the world as it really is and what it's going to take to change it. And as Karl Marx said, as the chairman often quotes, that philosophers have made a great deal of explaining the world, but the point is to change it. And that's what the philosophy of African internationalism is about. It's about changing the world. So studying African internationalism means studying and becoming better at doing the work of changing the world.
Yes, Uhuru. Yes, I really appreciate that, Chair Jesse. I know that Chairman talks about how, you know, we are not armchair revolutionaries, despite, you know, maybe we sit in armchairs sometimes, but you know, we don't just, you know, sit back and talk. We do, and the his slogan, you know, what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say, something like that. Exactly. And you know, I know that the African People's Socialist Party's rules of party discipline that are listed in every Burning Spear newspaper, the first principle is to study and deepen your political understanding, but that's to do the work. Right. It's not just, as you said, to feel smart.
Right. So you will.
Yes.
African internationalism will make you a genius.
Uhuru. I want to appreciate Leah Fifield, who is tuning in from Minneapolis on YouTube.
All right. Uhuru, Leah.
And I want to appreciate Virginia Wilson from Louisville, Kentucky, who's tuning in, and Ron Hudson from Seattle. And there are other people on here who haven't commented yet, so I encourage everyone to comment, say where you're tuning in from. It's really great to see all the different places that people join this study. Also, I know that in the chairman's political report to the 7th plenary, which is this little binder here, he talks about encouraging or mandating really every area of the movement to have weekly studies, and so this study is a mandate of the African People's Socialist Party, and it's a thrilling one to implement.
It is.
Uhuru. And Ali Aiello is tuning in from St. Pete.
Ali Aiello, membership chair.
Yes, Uhuru. And also want to appreciate our studio audience, including Amanda Carlozzi,
Uhuru.
and Kyle Weiss, our incredible engineer. Uhuru.
Right on.
All right. So we study the Burning Spear newspaper, which is the news organ of the Afghan People's Socialist Party, from the perspective of the Afghan working class. And on page 8, you will see the article we are studying tonight, which is from the point of the spear from the Chairman Amali Tella's office. And this article we're reading tonight is a part of a transcription of an overview given by Chairman Amali Tella on Saturday, July 27th, during a National Central Committee meeting of the Afghan People's Socialist Party held in St. Louis, Missouri. It is called We're Trying to Build a Revolution. The Afghan People's Socialist Party is the Advanced Detachment. And so we're going to start a few paragraphs in under the headline, The Reparations Demand Grasped by the Masses. And this is a longer article. It goes to 2 pages after this. So we'll give you those pages in a second, but it begins on page 8. So, Chair Jesse, would you like me to begin? Or?
Sure.
All right. So, the whole question of reparations. The Chinese Revolution was a peasant-based revolution. It defied all the Marxist assumptions about how the revolution had to be centered in the working class as such. And Chairman Mao organized the peasants. Let me see. The vast majority of the contradictions were concentrated in the countryside, so he organized the peasants. Quote, "Land to the peasants," was a really important slogan. Oh, someone commented on YouTube, we are building a revolution, not trying to build. And we are doing both. Land to the peasants became a really important slogan for the Russian Revolution too, because Russia, was a semi-feudal country and peasantry was a critical component. That's why they said the Russians would never be able to have a socialist revolution in part. Land to the peasants became a critical component. As the revolution heated up, the struggle got hotter and hotter. What began to happen was the peasants in Russia start taking the goddarn land. They start taking the land, the same thing that happened in China. The people start taking the stuff, then that escalates the revolution. Then that escalates the revolutionary process that allows for these socialists and communists to come to power in Russia and China. So again, this is from Chairman Amali Tella himself. When the masses of our people, Afghan people, understand that reparations is your stuff, F the Congress, F the court, all of this, it's yours. What's over there on the other side, that's your stuff they got in the refrigerator. Those are your streets, your children's future, that they have over there, talking about white people. When the masses begin to get that, then the masses will become self-activating. The 9mm becomes legitimate when you're snatching something from someone in the alley, depending on who you're snatching it from. The colonized masses that have become active in the whole process of the revolutionary project, and of course what facilitates that is the presence and the leadership of the Afghan People's Socialist Party, the Advanced Detachment.
Let's talk about that for a second, if we may.
Yes.
So, looking at the analogy that he's making to the demand for reparations as a revolutionary demand, and the demand of the Russian Revolution for land to the peasants. I just want to talk about that for a second.
Totally.
Because I think it's a really powerful connection that he's drawing. And he's talking about how, well, first of all, as he explained, interestingly enough, the orthodox Marxist conception of how a socialist revolution would occur is that there has to be capitalism, fully developed capitalism, before there's the possibility of a socialist revolution. So as he points out, both China and Russia did not fit the mold. The two largest, quote, Marxist revolutions in world history actually did not fit the mold of what Marx predicted a communist or a socialist revolution would look like, because both China and Russia were heavily peasant-based and peasant-led, and revolutionary struggles. And he said that therefore the vast majority of the contradictions were concentrated in the countryside. So they had to organize the peasants, and the slogan became "Land to the peasants." And as he's explaining, that for the peasants to seize land was necessary to move forward the social development inside of Russia to make it more ripe for a socialist revolution. But the connection that the chairman's drawing is that when the communists in Russia said "land to the peasants," they weren't saying it primarily to the government of Russia.
Yeah.
They weren't saying to the Tsar, "Give land to the peasants." They were saying "land to the peasants," and the peasants responded by taking the land.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it a revolutionary demand. And you see the analogy, the connection that he's drawing.
It's not begging, the Tsar to please give us the land.
Right.
It's just taking it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same effect that that reparations as a revolutionary demand, that's the function that it plays in the African Revolution. And there's multiple sides to that. But in the case of making it a revolutionary demand of the African masses, that, as the chairman says, that as African people really, as the concept of reparations grips the African masses, it becomes a material force in the form of African people literally taking what belongs to them and what is rightfully theirs. So I just think that's it's such a great analogy and such a great way of the chairman explaining and giving a historical precedent, for what that looks like. I just wanted to comment on that.
Of course. And I think it's really, powerful that, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement was formed, because it gives us a chance to, get on the right side of things and join, under the vanguard of the African masses in, taking the demand for reparations into our white communities.
Right. Yeah. Which means, in part, standing in solidarity with the right of African people to take land for the peasants, to take reparations, to take everything that belongs to them. That's ultimately what the stand of reparations for white people means. It's more than just giving monthly contributions, although everyone is encouraged to do so. It's about those what those monthly contributions mean is my monthly contributions are going to the African Revolution. They're not going to some individual or some charity project. They're going to the African Revolution, whose goal is for African people to take back every single thing that belongs to them.
Yes.
So let's keep going.
Uhuru.
The party must clearly ascend to leadership. Here's Chairman Amali Shatella from the point of the spear. We define revolution for this period, which is why I just went through this stuff that I'm going through. We defined the white people issue. We moved away from the superstitions.
And it goes to page 14. The bottom of page 14.
And all of this with. Okay. We are the forces who have defined that. And I'm saying this because...
it goes to the bottom of page 14, and then it will go to the bottom of page 15. So,
okay. Yeah. This stuff that's really informed and misinformed what we do around the white people question. To make white people this really mysterious entity that's not even human. White people, have done stuff that we would place outside the category of what human beings do. But white people are human, and to the point that we give them this otherworldly kind of characterization, the white man is the devil, the white man is a mutation, and stuff like that, we mystify this guy, and we can't know how to fight him. The Vietnamese knew how to fight him, and they kicked his ass. They said the white man is powerful from a distance because he's got all these powerful bombs, but he's slow and he's clumsy. This is what the Vietnamese said, and the average weight of the Vietnamese when they fought was 97 pounds. They said in order to defeat the white man, you have to get in close and grab him by the belt. The point that I'm making here is that we defined the whole question of white people, white power, mystery that's been given to white people. There ain't no mystery to us no more, and we are collecting reparations as this debate is going on.
Yes.
We've organized the African People's Solidarity Committee and extended the African Revolution into the white world. That's real. There's no way you can erase that. You can't take that back. We extended the African Revolution into the white world, and we built cadre of white people who would do that.
Uhuru.
Lot to talk about there as well.
Yes, lots. Should we continue on and say at the end, or sum up now?
Let's keep going.
All right. Ideological and political clarity is key. We've defined the features of African identity and the character of a united African internationalist revolutionary movement. We've done that. And he's talking about the African People's Socialist Party. Garvey, Marcus Garvey, is the closest thing to have ever made that happen. Garvey came under such slander from the same forces that we have to contend with. This is now at the bottom of page 15. We are the forces who have defined that, and I'm saying this because this space is getting clearer and clearer. And what has to happen is that science and clarity are a real requirement for this moment. Ideological and political clarity is really a requirement for this moment. The deepening crisis of imperialism, more people are coming into the party or trying to make it into the party. It's precisely now that greater clarity is required. We have challenged this whole thing of single-issue organizations and small circle activism. You know what I mean by that? Organizations that find themselves just organizing around a single issue, like somehow this issue, this thing. No, 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 no. We are saying that it's all right for people to unite and organize around a single issue, but that ain't revolution. There are revolutionaries, and we might deal with that issue, or single issue, but within a revolutionary context, like reparations, like any kind of question. A small circle activism, where you're not even trying to build a revolutionary movement, everybody is just small circleism. Forget that.
I can really hear the chairman's voice.
Yeah, mine does not do it justice.
Oh, you're doing good.
Thanks.
Okay, we're trying to build a revolution. We want to be every place, ever present, all everywhere. That's what it takes to build a revolution. Mm-hmm. We are moving beyond and are forcing the organization to move beyond this. The movement is everything, but the revolution is nothing mindset. People make themselves significant because they're in the movement. They do this, they do that. But to what end is what we always say. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't lead to revolutionary transformation, then what the heck is it? If you're reading along, you know that's a little bit not exactly what it says. You understand. They can get involved, they're active, sometimes they do dashing stuff, but the movement is everything and the revolution is nothing. We're building revolution. That's the fundamental thing that we are stepping forward as the leadership of the African Revolution. We build the ASI, African Socialist International, as the primary responsibility. That's the meaning of the slogan, organize, organize, organize. People say, organize what? Organize the African world. And white people organize the white world.
Yes, sure.
We can't be free without that. The white world became organized as a part of the process of putting us into colonial slavery. So organize the white world to undo the process of having... Okay, just to be clear. Mm-hmm. We have to be organized everywhere as a part of the process to break us out of colonial slavery and to move towards liberation.
The party has positioned ourselves for the task. We, the African People's Socialist Party, built more than 50 institutions. They exist now, and they're growing. We utilize nearly all forms of struggle. There's not a form of struggle that we have not used. We use electoral, protest, ideological. We fight against race nationalism. We fight against the concept of racism in dealing with this colonial question. We have stood the test of time, the African People's Socialist Party. We have achieved the political maturity and the experience that validates our position as the advanced detachment of our nation and class in the struggle against imperialism. It's important for us to understand that, and how we move today should presuppose that reality, and any space that we go to should reflect that reality. We don't go into any space as some kind of Johnny-come-lately newcomers, as long as you're black it's all right kind of thing. We go there as representatives of the African Revolution, period. Wherever it exists on the planet Earth, We are that and more Africans around the world are recognizing that. We certainly saw that since Oxford. The Chairman Mali Echellah spoke at the Oxford Union in January of last year. Yes. And there's other stuff that's been happening that continues to validate that. I just want us to understand that. I think we have to be extremely clear about who we are. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. So I want to appreciate other people tuning in as well. You see here we had Nina Guevara tuning in from New Jersey.
Uhuru,
and
Nina.
Jacob Scott from Spokane, Washington.
Jake Scott. Uhuru.
All right. So there's
Awesome.
a lot to unpack here, obviously.
Let's unpack it.
Uhuru. Anything you would like to begin with, share, Jesse?
Sure. Yeah, I think I would like to talk about the section that where he talks about the African People's Solidarity Committee and just the whole question of how African internationalism brought science to every single question.
Yes.
And how important that is, and to really, really appreciate the significance historically of the development of the theory of African internationalism. Mm-hmm. Because, we learn in the Uhuru movement from the chairman, from the African People's Socialist Party, and from studies led by Chairwoman Penny, putting forward the chairman's understandings of the world and history, that what happened in the 1960s, it's really important to understand what actually happened in the 1960s, because you grow up in my generation, perhaps you learned about the 60s through this romantic lens. Oh, it was a wonderful time of counterculture and social and political radicalism and experimentation. And there was, psychedelic drugs and women's liberation and black liberation and blah, blah, blah. And then all of those things either went out of style or perhaps they all achieved their goals and were no longer relevant. And things morphed into the 70s and then into the 80s and blah, 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 and here we are today. And there are still some things that are left over that need to be dealt with. But for the most part, we've made great gains and great progress, and we had a black president and so on and so forth. And if you are taught anything about the downfall, as they might characterize it, of the Black Revolution, the Black movement of the 1960s, you are taught that Martin Luther King, you might not even be taught that Martin Luther King was assassinated. They might not even tell you that. They might not.
They might not.
But if you are taught that, you certainly won't be
some
informed.
outsider type person.
Some random person. You won't be explained to you that it was a U.S. government program to crush the movement of black people struggling for justice and freedom that resulted in the assassination. If you watch the new Netflix series about the assassination of Malcolm X,
that's right.
You might be led to believe that it's just one of the great unsolved mysteries of our time, worthy of a Law and Order episode. That it was just some errant Nation of Islam member with a grudge against Malcolm that resulted in his death. And in the feminist classrooms of bourgeois American universities, you might learn that the Black Power movement was brought down by male chauvinism, which is what I was taught when I was younger. But in actuality, the history is quite different. The history is that the Black Revolution, which was a revolution, and the chairman makes that clear, that there was a revolution inside this country. It did not succeed in overturning the U.S. government or in U.S. imperialism, but as the chairman says, if what happened in 1905 in Russia can be called a revolution, then certainly what happened inside this country in the 1960s can be called a revolution. To the extent that J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations at the time, referred to the black movement inside the U.S. as the gravest threat to the internal security of the United States since the Civil War. So it's very clear that what happened inside this country in the 1960s was a revolution. It was a black revolution, and it was part of a wave of revolutionary struggle that was happening all around the world. The Chinese Revolution had just occurred right before the dawn of the 1960s. The Cuban Revolution happened in 1959. You had struggles happening all throughout Africa. You had struggles for independence that were being waged throughout Africa. You had the struggles in Vietnam. You had so much going on in the 1960s. Revolution was the main trend. As the chairman has said, revolution was being called for in every language on every continent of the planet Earth. And what put an end to that was not a change in fashion. What put an end to that was a systematic, planned, deliberate, full spectrum warfare, counterinsurgency war against the African Revolution first and foremost, but world revolution in general. You saw at the same time that Africans inside this country, 30 members of the Black Panther Party were assassinated by the US government and local police officers, local police departments in this country in 1968 alone. 30 members of the Black Panther Party were assassinated. Over 300 members of the Black Panther Party were forced into prison. Several were forced into exile. People like Assad Shakur, who lives to this day in political asylum in Cuba. And at the same time, in 1961, I might be wrong on that date, but in the early 60s, you had the brutal kidnapping and torture and ultimate assassination of Patrice Lumumba, who was tortured in an airplane after he was kidnapped. The neo-colonial forces who were instructed to torture him were given huge amounts of alcohol to consume before they tortured him because of the level of sadism that they were expected to carry out. And they beat him and brutalized him so badly that the pilot was worried that the plane was going to crash because of how violently Lumumba was being beaten. And then they cut up his body and incinerated his corpse in vats of acid. This is what the US government did, the CIA and the US government did to African people and to African revolutionaries all around the world, including inside this country, where they busted into Fred Hampton's living quarters at 4 a.m. and shot him dead in his mattress while he slept, and also killed another member of the Black Panther Party named Mark Clark. So this is what happened to the Black Revolution of the 1960s. It was militarily destroyed by a U.S. counterinsurgency. It was physically destroyed. Its leaders were destroyed. Its leaders were physically murdered or put in jail. Chairman Omali Yeshitela himself says that he was in and out of prison and jail so often that he barely knew what city he was in at any given time. And they did all kinds of things to spread chaos inside of the Black Revolution. They forged letters from one leader to another saying, oh, this person's wife is sleeping with this person, or this guy says that you're a pig. No, this guy says you're an agent, to try to create false conflict and discord inside of the revolutionary movement, to create subjectivism and to create violence. And they used slander and they used drugs. There's so much more we could say about that. But the point is, the U.S. government destroyed the Black Revolution of the 1960s. And as the Uhuru movement has pointed out, as the chairman has pointed out, the process of physically destroying the Black Revolution of the 1960s also meant destroying the ideas, also meant destroying the ideology. Believe it or not, although we put so much effort into winning white people to understand that it's colonialism, and the chairman in the African People's Socialist Party has spent decades establishing and winning that understanding in the world, there was a time in this country when it was not that abnormal to hear people talk about African people in this country as colonized. Malcolm X talked about it. The Black Panthers talked about it, not with the same level of clarity that the chairman ultimately acquired, but it was an understanding that it was a colony inside the U.S., and there were even mainstream books about it. But those ideas were crushed. Those ideas were pushed out of history and replaced by bourgeois ideological academic philosophy that mainly functioned to discredit, to ideologically discredit the ideological basis for the Black Revolution, the anti-colonial struggle of the 1960s. So the Black Panther Party, although we look back on the Black Panther Party as being, the center of the revolutionary struggle in the 1960s, its revolutionary lifespan lasted only 4 years before it was effectively crushed and most of its leaders jailed and assassinated. Huey Newton was in prison for most of the time that the Black Panther Party existed. And the point is that they barely had any time to form and develop a coherent, cohesive, scientific, revolutionary socialist ideology to guide the Black Revolution to victory. They had barely any time to do that because they were under the gunfire of US imperialism every single time they, looked out the window. So the significance of the chairman and the African People's Socialist Party emerging from the ashes of the graveyard that was left behind after the defeat of the Black Revolution and being able to, number one, sum up the Black Revolution was defeated. And that means that we don't just go on business as usual and say, okay, well, let's keep this going and not say we have to regroup and sum up what to do about that. Like, the revolution was defeated. The revolution was destroyed. So that means that the goal has to be to rebuild the revolution, one, and two, just to learn the lessons and solve the problems left unresolved after the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. And one of those things was theory, having a revolutionary theory, having a revolutionary science that went beyond Marx and Lenin and all of that, and from the African working class worldview was able to sum up and analyze the world and how it got to be the way it is and what it's going to take to change it. And the chairman formed the theory of African internationalism for that very purpose. And I'm going on this long-winded thing here to get to the point that you just really, really have to understand the significance of just even the existence of the theory of African internationalism and the way that African internationalism, the theory is why the African People's Socialist Party and the African Revolution will be successful in destroying US imperialism. Not because of any individuals that might be involved at any given time, but because of the theory which guides the entire movement and which guides all individuals. What I mean by individuals, because I don't want to be misunderstood, the individuals who make up the African People's Socialist Party and all of its organizations are amazing people, magnificent leaders and revolutionaries, obviously. But the point is that, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has said, that they can't undo the theory of African internationalism. And as long as the theory is given to the masses, no matter what they do to any individual or any wing or pocket of the revolution anywhere, it will always continue to move forward and grow because the seeds have been planted and the theory of African internationalism is there. So anyway, there's more to say on that, but I just think it's really key to understand that this theory is a life and death thing. This theory is what is going to secure the ability for the victory of the African working class, and that it's built into the theory itself. Every question, the leadership of the African working class, the role of white people, the basis for reparations, the fact that you need a party, you need a revolutionary party of the advanced detachment, cadres who are organized to go wherever they have to go and do whatever they have to do to lead the revolution to victory, that is built into the theory of African internationalism itself. And it should inform us as white people that we have to move with extreme urgency in this period to spread the theory of African internationalism amongst the white population and win white people to see that this is the only way forward. This is the only future for human beings on this planet. And that's really clear. Even the bourgeoisie is feeling very pessimistic about the future of life itself on the planet Earth. And African internationalism is the only way forward. Uhuru.
Uhuru Jesse, I really want to appreciate that that very strongly. I want to transcribe that and would propose that we post that. Obviously, you are a cadre, you are a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and have learned so much from Chairman Omali Yeshitela from the African People's Socialist Party and have internalized that. And for the average white person, listening to you say that, it's not something we often hear from a white person or any person if we're not familiar with the movement. And I think that we can all emulate you and really work to internalize everything that you just said, the urgency, because unlike an African mother who's worried about her child making it home from school, or living under the severe oppression, living as a colonized person, the average white person, we are so often in our little white bubbles. We are scrolling on Instagram, we're trying to check out from reality so often, and to be able to, internalize, what's really happening and to do something about it. So many of us, we want to check out because, we see the horrible reality and we don't want to live on the pedestal of oppression, but those of us who haven't met the movement yet, or are internalizing what the movement is still, it's easy to check out, but we have this opportunity to create the world that we want to see. I think that is very important for us to internalize, as you said, the urgency of this. We do have a question from Ron Hudson.
Hudson.
Yes, who says, what are good strategies for answering people who ask us to do individual things in the name of, quote, reparations? So what are good strategies for answering people who ask us to do individual things in the name of, quote, reparations? And I'm not entirely sure, Ron, if you mean to donate to an individual and say that's reparations, or to any number of things that have been called reparations in this movement, or in the world. I mean, not in the movement. I don't know if you want to take that on, Chair Jesse.
I mean, I'm not going to tell you not to, if somebody is asking you for some money because they need help. I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but it's not reparations, because otherwise, every white person who's sending $1 a day to Rwanda is paying reparations. I mean, reparations doesn't go to an individual, because we don't have an individually oppressive relationship to African people. The relationship that we have is not to a single African individual, and as long as we can do right by that African individual, then we have somehow done reparations and repaired our colonial relationship to African people as a whole. We have a parasitic relationship to the entire African population worldwide, and there's nothing on a personal level that we can do that's going to overturn that.
I appreciate that, Chair Jesse. And I wanted to ask, because we hear the term systemic racism a lot.
I love that. Let's talk about that.
It's not just, our feelings and ideas are built into this system, and therefore we just have to work really hard to unlearn our racism so that the system is affected by it, that otherwise it's a good system. The police system is good.
Okay.
We just need non-racist police, things like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear your thoughts, Chair Jesse, on, quote, systemic racism versus colonialism.
All right. So, yeah, just to reiterate, that this study and all of the views espoused therein are from the theory of African internationalism as developed by Chairman Amalia Shatella. And I can tell you for a fact that if I had not met this movement and studied and internalized the worldview of African internationalism, that I would not have these understandings or be able to come to these conclusions at all. I can tell you that for a fact because I remember how I used to think before I met the Uhuru movement. I thought Obama was somehow going to that his presidency was somehow going to result in an improvement of conditions for African people inside this country. So I know for a fact that, and not just me, but there's also hundreds of years of evidence that without the leadership of the African working class, white people are not going to be able to come to these conclusions. We're going to come to conclusions based on our opportunistic relationship to the social system, which is that we benefit from the oppression of African people. We sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people. So this pedestal destroying ideological worldview that we are expressing in this study is only possible through not just studying African internationalism, actually, but being under the leadership and working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. That's how we can really begin, because, anyway, that's how we can do it. So systemic racism, let's talk about that. So first of all, Chairman Amalia Shatella has said that what is racism? Racism is the ideological foundation of parasitic capitalism. And the chairman has made clear that racism is it's the ideas in the minds of white people. It's the ideas in the minds of white people that I am better than someone because of my race, quote unquote. So it's racial ideology is in white people's heads, and it's the ideological justification for the actual material, social, economic, military system of capitalism and colonial oppression. Colonialism is not an idea in the minds of white people. Colonialism is an actual systemic relationship between two peoples, an oppressor nation and an oppressed nation, and that relationship is maintained by state power in the hands of the oppressor nation, and that relationship is maintained in order to suck resources and value out of the oppressed nation to benefit the members of the oppressor nation. So that's what colonialism is. So in other words, colonialism is white people, benefiting from the stolen land of the indigenous people. White people benefiting from the stolen labor of African people. White people benefiting from all forms of oppression of African people is colonialism. And the colonialism looks like the state, the prison system and the police and the military occupation of the African community. Like, that's colonialism. And as Chairwoman Penny often says, you can go to an unlearning racism workshop, or you can even pay $2,500 to go to an anti-racist dinner, which is the new fad in some petty bourgeois circles. And you can feel really good about yourself for having overcome your racist thoughts, and then get in your car and drive home. And on your way home, there's an African getting brutalized by the police on the sidewalk. And your racist thoughts are not going to stop that cop from doing that, because that cop is a functionary of a social system in which the state play the role of maintaining the divide between the colonizer and the colonized. So that's kind of the basic understanding, but more specifically, systemic racism or institutional racism is another term that you hear. Sometimes people will try to say that that's another way of saying colonialism, systemic racism or institutional racism. And I don't really understand how that works. Like, the system is racist, so the system doesn't like black people, is what you're saying. You're saying that's why millions of Africans are locked up. African people are murdered by police all the time. White vigilantes round up Africans and kill them. African children are, beaten in school and put in chokeholds, and all of this horrible stuff is happening because the system doesn't have nice thoughts about black people. It doesn't really make any sense. Systemic racism. And, the idea is, well, like, no, not the system doesn't like black people, but like the majority of the people who make up the system don't like black people. So in order to overcome systemic racism, all the people in the system who run the system have to be convinced to be less racist. Now, you think I'm joking right now, but that's actually what these anti-racist crusaders do.
Yeah.
Not Tom Cruise. What's his name? Tim Wise.
Tim Wise. Anyway.
Tim Wise does anti-racist workshops for cops.
Ugh, God.
Okay? So he is on a crusade against systemic racism. Actually, he's just trying to make a buck. But anyway, he claims to be on a crusade against systemic racism, which means he sits in a room and teaches cops how not to say the N-word when they're beating up an African, or whatever. So, I mean, it's complete garbage. Anyway.
We have a comment from Penny Hess, the
Chairwoman Penny Hess.
African People's Solidarity Committee, Uhuru. Says, Uhuru, this is a powerful political education, Chair Jesse. We also have Paula Lipsy saying, viewing from Arizona, agreed with everything said. We have a lot of comments from Virginia as well in Unity. We have 7 minutes, but Leah Fifield asked, we have 6 minutes left of this study, but she does ask, can you say more about how it's in all white people's interest to support revolution led by the African working class? So
who asked that?
Leah Fifield.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to shout out Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Yes.
And we are going to be inviting Chairwoman Penny to come back onto this study very soon. So we look forward to that. And I just personally want to say that I've learned so much and continue to learn so much from Chairwoman Penny who leads the African People's Solidarity Committee and has been a part of this movement working under the leadership of the chairman since 1976. So, and continues to just lead in the most powerful way in building the revolutionary movement of reparations to African people inside the white community under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. So Uhuru, salute to Chairwoman Penny.
Yes.
And as far as that question, maybe you should take that one on, Jackson.
Yeah, certainly. I also want to say, because I didn't mention earlier, that in terms of the African nation and the history you were laying out, Terjesti, the Black Power movement, really encourage two books in particular, all of the writings of the Uhuru movement, but particularly Overturning the Culture of Violence, which is by Chairwoman Penny Hess, really goes into the history of this culture of violence that we're in, including the Black Power movement and white opportunism during that time and since, and also Vanguard, the Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution by Chairman Amalia Chitela. Both can be bought at Burning Spear Marketplace. There's entire chapters about what African internationalism is, etc. So really encourage that. But yes, so how is it in white people's interests to come under the leadership of the African Revolution? I know that in terms of the word, support the revolution, we can actually become a part of the revolution and extend the African Revolution into our white communities. And that it's in our interests, it's in our long-term interests, because, this parasitic system that is, it's not healthy for anyone. And so the system that is, discriminated against LGBT people, the quote unquote rape culture, all these things that we see that we don't want to be a part of, that affect us or people we know, etc. Even the problems of white people on the pedestal of repression, they are caused by the same social system that is committing genocide against African people and other colonized people, and that instead of being opportunists and fighting just for our own, I think Terjesti, you and other people in the Uhuru movement have used the example of, a white woman, slave owner, being beaten by her white slaver husband and asking, the enslaved Africans to join her in, trying to stop the white slave owner from oppressing her. But, what she needs to do is join the enslaved people in rising up against the slave master, not in asking them to join her, little fight on the pedestal of slavery, but, joining under them to overturn the whole thing. That's affecting her too. So, in terms of, our long-term interests, if we want the type of world we want to see, we need to join under the leadership of the African Revolution in doing that.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I unite with that response. I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to mention, I think it's in the new political report, and he talks about this elsewhere. The chairman tells the story about the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and he talks about how in the early years of the creation of APSC, that forming a white solidarity organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party was very controversial, to put it mildly, obviously amongst the white left and even within the broader, black nationalist movement or what have you. And I believe the term he uses is that the creation of APSC was met with a buzzsaw of a program, which, grab your dictionaries or ask Siri to define that for you, means extremely harsh, brutal criticism and slander, really. Yeah. But one of the things that which included things like white feminists saying that APSC was white lesbians working under the leadership of black men, which, wow, that's so terrible. What a horrible. And also that it was not in the interest. White communists argued that white people would never be won to work against their interests by joining under the leadership of the anti-colonial struggle of African people. And the chairman always says, what an extraordinary statement, what a revealing statement for a white communist to make about where they see the interests of white people, that they think that it's against the interests of white people to be part of struggling with African people against colonialism and
Yeah.
ultimately for genuine communism and socialism. Like the white communist thinks that that's against the interests of white people, and
Yeah.
that's how revealing that was, and that the creation of APSC was based on the premise that that it is in the interests, that it's in the interests of all people. And like Chairwoman Penny often points out, like the African People's Socialist Party is going towards the future. They're going for victory. They're going for socialism, and they're going to take everybody else with them. All the Mexican people, the Arab people, the indigenous people of this land, all oppressed and colonized peoples around the world, and even white people who are willing to commit national suicide and stop being white, which only means uniting with white power and with what it means to be on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, and joining the rest of the human beings on the planet Earth who are fighting to build a world without oppression, slavery, and exploitation. So it's in our profound interests. It's in the interest of every white person to join this movement and fight for a different kind of world. And I mean, there's really so many ways. We could do an entire study on why it's in the interest, or multiple studies on why it's in the interest of white people. I mean, there's the reasons that Jackson mentioned, that for one, any form of oppression experienced by a white person is in the context of white power. So the way to overcome it is to destroy white power. There's the fact that at the end of the day, it's not in your interest to be a thief, and to be living off the stolen riches of the rest of the world, especially when the rest of the world is determined to take it back. So if you want to go from that angle, it's not in your financial interests, in your material interests, to hedging your bets on systematic thievery, when you're eventually going to be, justice is going to be brought to that. And third, that it's in our interests on like the most fundamental level of what it means to be a human being, that we are isolated from the rest of humanity. And I will end with this because I know we're over time. We are isolated from the rest of humanity as white people. And one semi-joking example that I give is that if you go into a music store, there's actually a separate section called world music. Like there's all the music white people listen to, and then there's a whole genre called world. Like that's basically a metaphor for white people's relationship to the rest of the world. We have voluntarily exiled ourselves from the rest of humanity in our tower of stolen riches and stolen resources and stolen labor and stolen lives. We have sheltered ourselves from the rest of humanity on top of a mountain of other human beings suffering. And that is a very untenable place to be, and it's a very unhappy, depressing, anxiety-inducing, and lonely place to be.
Yeah.
And, instead of having thousands of friends on Facebook, we can have billions of actual revolutionary connections to the peoples of the world by joining the African Revolution and fighting for reparations to African people. It's for us on the deepest level in terms of what it means to be alive and to be a human being, to fight for reparations to African people.
Leah says, Uhuru, so appreciative of this study. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
That answered your questions, Leah. All right, so appreciate that very much, Chair Jesse. Appreciate all the questions that we got. And to become a member or to contribute reparations, you can go to uhurusolidarity.org and become a member today if you're not already, or bump your membership up to the next level and pay reparations at uhurusolidarity.org. And you can also volunteer, become either an active member or just an active volunteer by emailing us at info@uhurusolidarity.org. The links are in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. And we have some announcements. So, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement 2020 National Convention Reparations Uprising is this coming April 18th and 19th. That's a Saturday and Sunday in St. Louis, Missouri at the Black Power Blueprint Economic Projects in the new Uhuru House there. You can register at the link provided. You can also attend Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Sunday Studies, #Omali Taught Me, every Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern at youtube.com/UhuruTV or facebook.com/omali.yeshitela. And you can, hear from the chairman himself, summing up this political period, answering questions, and receiving that political education. Also, we can attend in solidarity the African National Women's Organization's convention, the Black Women's Convention, called Sisters United for Revolution. We can attend in solidarity on March 27th through the 29th, and you can register at convention.anwo-uhuru.org. ANWO is one of the mass organizations of the African People's Socialist Party, this one particularly answering the questions around the special oppression of African women. And then our next reparations study group is episode 11. Will be this coming Thursday, same time, same place, and you can RSVP at the link provided. So I want to appreciate you, Chair Jesse, for being on the show, and appreciate everyone for tuning in.
Uhuru.
And Uhuru.
Uhuru.